Hello everyone. I bet you're watching this video to relax your mind and drift off to sleep. So if you enjoy it, don't hesitate to like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. And while you're at it, let me know where you're from and what time you're watching. Are you ready? The exciting story begins right here.
Story 1. Friday night, May 25th, 2018. Around 9 p.m., Gerald stepped out of his bustling restaurant. He was on his way to attend the grand opening of his family's new restaurant. Before leaving, Gerald had called his wife to let her know he would be home late. On the other end of the line, his wife was busy doing laundry while watching her favorite Korean drama. Gerald reminded her to make sure all the doors and windows were securely locked. Time passed and the night grew later. As the clock neared the early hours of the morning, Gerald finally arrived home. He parked his car in front of the house but immediately sensed something was off. The house, usually dark when he returned late, was brightly lit this time. All the lights inside the house were on, even the basement light, something his wife never did. His heart began to race. Feeling uneasy, he pulled out his phone and tried calling his wife, but there was no answer. His worry intensified. He hurried to the side door of the house, and when he opened it, the sight inside left him stunned. The house was in shambles. Furniture was scattered everywhere, and one of the interior doors was hanging off its hinges. The darkness of the night outside seemed to mirror the growing dread inside him. Something was terribly wrong. With bated breath, Gerald stepped further into the house that once felt safe. What had happened? And what would he discover amidst the chaos? After entering the house, Gerald's eyes were immediately drawn to the overwhelming chaos. Items were strewn across the floor, furniture was destroyed, and the walls seemed like silent witnesses to an inexplicable devastation. Without wasting a second, he rushed upstairs, his heart pounding with fear, terrified of what might have happened to his 3 daughters. As he opened each of their bedroom doors, a wave of relief washed over him. His daughters were still sound asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just torn through their lives. But when Gerald stepped into the master bedroom, that relief was instantly replaced by unimaginable horror. On the bed lay his wife, Roddery, motionless, her body covered by a blanket. Yet something was terribly wrong. With trembling hands, he pulled back the blanket, and in that moment, his world collapsed. His wife was lifeless, her face drenched in blood, marred by horrific wounds. In a panic, Gerald immediately called 911, his voice hoarse as he begged for help. While waiting for the authorities, he forbade his now awake daughters from entering the room. They couldn't see their mother like this. Desperate, Gerald attempted CPR, though deep down, he knew the chances were slim. His wife's face was mangled from the savage blows, blood poured from her broken nose, her jaw shattered, and her teeth had been knocked out. He had to pull them from her mouth with his own hands. When the police arrived, they confirmed Gerald's worst fear. Roddery, only 41 years old, was dead. Not only brutally beaten but also found naked, lying on their bed. The room was in complete disarray. Drawers were pulled out, valuables missing. The home that had once been their sanctuary had now become the stage for a heinous crime. The tragic news quickly spread throughout the neighborhood, shaking the residents who never imagined that such a horrifying event could occur in their peaceful and quiet community. Who could commit such a heinous act? Gerald DeQuincy, known as a loving husband and father, now found himself in the midst of his worst nightmare. This brutal murder not only claimed the life of his wife, Roddery Estrada, but also shattered his family in an instant. A tragedy they had never imagined would happen in Toronto City, a place they always called home. They had once been just 2 people who frequently met at their favorite cafe to enjoy a cup of coffee together. But for Gerald, those meetings carried a deeper meaning. He was drawn to Roddery, not just for her beauty, but for the hard-working spirit that radiated from her. Roddery worked as a nurse at a local hospital, while Gerald managed his family's long-established restaurant. That attraction blossomed into love, and they married in 2003. From their marriage, 3 daughters were born, becoming the center of their lives. At the time of the tragedy, their daughters were 14, 13, and 9 years old. Roddery was known as a responsible mother, even though her demanding job as a nurse required her to work long shifts. She always made time to take care of her children, driving them to extracurricular activities and taking them on picnics in the park every weekend. To others, their family life seemed perfect. But behind that happiness, no one ever suspected that Roddery would meet such a brutal end. The forensic officers who arrived at the crime scene quickly focused their attention on the basement of the house, which seemed to be the key location. The basement floor appeared to have been dug up, and the window there was left wide open, something that struck Gerald as odd. He swore he had never left the basement window open after the construction workers finished their tasks, even though the basement was indeed undergoing renovations to become a playroom for his children. But there was something even more sinister. The basement window's curtain lay discarded outside, as if it had been forcibly removed. Officers also discovered footprints scattered across the floor, creating a pattern that suggested the perpetrator may have entered through the basement window. Each detail made it increasingly clear that the home had been violently breached. As the master bedroom was examined, the horror escalated. Near the foot of the bed, they found a crowbar, suspected to be the weapon used to attack Roddery. The dried blood at the end of the crowbar underscored the brutality suffered by the mother of 3. The officers immediately questioned the construction workers about whether the crowbar belonged to their tools. But the response they received deepened the chilling atmosphere. "That's not ours," said one of the workers, indicating that the crowbar belonged to the killer. This fact sent a wave of dread among the investigators. The crowbar, which did not originate from the house, indicated that the perpetrator had come with a plan, ready to take Roddery's life in the most savage manner. Who was the perpetrator, and why did they choose Roddery? These questions hung heavily in the air, casting a dark shadow over what had once seemed a perfect family. The officers moved quickly after discovering suspicious conditions at the crime scene. A DNA isolation process was initiated, and the results were shocking. The foreign DNA found in Roddery's home was already in the national database. The fingerprints on the basement window frame also provided undeniable clues. After careful examination, all evidence pointed to a young man named Yastin, 22 years old. Just 24 hours after the brutal murder, Yastin was arrested. But during interrogation, he chose to remain silent about the details of the crime. Nonetheless, he coldly admitted one thing, that he was the one who killed Roddery. That brief confession made the blood of the investigators boil. Yastin was not a stranger to law enforcement. His criminal record revealed a dark history. Just 2 months before the murder, he had been arrested for violent behavior on the streets of the city. That night, he ran around wielding a crowbar and a pipe, randomly attacking 3 people. One of the victims, a woman, suffered serious facial injuries from the crowbar strike. Despite his alarming actions, Yastin was released just 2 days after his arrest with a bail of $500. The condition of his release was that he was not allowed to possess any weapons. Yet, 1 week after his release, Yastin was arrested again. This time, he violated his bail conditions by carrying a weapon and attacking a security guard. Strangely, once again, he was released on bail. And this time, that freedom gave him the opportunity to commit the most brutal act of his life. When the shoe prints found in Roddery's home were examined, the results became increasingly damning. It turned out that the prints matched the shoes owned by Yastin. Evidence began to pile up, clarifying his role in this brutal murder. A search of Yastin's room also revealed another shocking fact. Several cell phones found in his room actually belonged to the victim's family. These stolen items further locked in Yastin's fate under the heavy shadow of charges against him. With such strong evidence and a violent history, Yastin could no longer hide behind silence. The brutal actions he committed that night had brought him to an inescapable abyss, a destruction of his own life, but more tragically, the destruction of Roddery's family in an irreparable way. The once peaceful neighborhood was now overshadowed by a brutality they never imagined would occur. Because Yastin refused to speak, the police decided to dig deeper. They reviewed the CCTV footage around the crime scene, revealing that Yastin was a homeless person without a permanent residence. He was often seen at a homeless shelter not far from the victim's home. With this lead, the police narrowed their search. It didn't take long to find Yastin's trail after the murder. During the day, CCTV captured Yastin meeting his girlfriend at a fast food restaurant. In that meeting, Yastin appeared to hand over a stolen wallet, an item he had taken from the victim's home. The police immediately called his girlfriend in for questioning. During the interrogation, the woman admitted that Yastin often stole, but she had no idea that her boyfriend had killed someone. But the clues didn't stop there. The police found another CCTV recording showing Yastin walking with another man a few hours before the murder occurred. That man turned out to be Yastin's friend, who also lived in the same homeless shelter. The burning question now was, did this man know about the murder? Or, more terrifyingly, was he directly involved? The investigation became increasingly tense when forensic results from Roderi's body came back. DNA from another individual was found around the victim's private areas. Not Yastin's, but that of a man named David Beck, 23 years old. More shockingly, David was the man seen on CCTV walking alongside Yastin. The police quickly moved to apprehend David, and during interrogation, he initially denied any involvement. But when the police mentioned that his DNA was found on the victim's body, David's expression changed. In the tense atmosphere of the interrogation, he finally began to speak. David admitted that he also lived in a homeless shelter after being kicked out by his father due to drug addiction. Although David swore he had left the illegal substances behind, his involvement in this case became undeniable. What actually happened on the night of the murder? Was David merely caught up in Yastin's sadistic plan? Or did he also play a role in this brutal killing? With each new fact that emerged, the mystery deepened, and the tension escalated. Who was truly orchestrating that night of horror? And how far did David's involvement go in the nightmare now enveloping Roderi's family? Every passing second brought them closer to the unimaginable truth. That night, before the brutal murder took place, Yastin and David began preparing for their act in a seemingly innocuous way. They stole a bottle of wine from a store, and David joked that it was better to drink wine than to return to using drugs. But that petty theft was just the beginning of a night that would transform into an unimaginable nightmare. After stealing the wine, they decided to return to the victim's home, Roderi. David followed Yastin, who had already planned the robbery. Initially, David thought it would just be a typical burglary, but everything changed once they entered. As the incident unfolded, Roderi, waking from her sleep, was suddenly confronted with horror. Without warning, Yastin brutally attacked her using a crowbar he found in the garage of the house. David, in his confession to the police, claimed that while Roderi was being mercilessly beaten, he never intended to hurt anyone. But the reality was different. Roderi fell to the ground, powerless, and Yastin coldly finished her off. Meanwhile, David, who initially claimed he had no idea Yastin was going to commit murder, played a role in the horrific actions that followed. After Roderi was killed by Yastin, instead of fleeing, David opened the victim's clothes and proceeded to violate Roderi's lifeless body. Yastin, satisfied with his actions, suggested they flee, but David appeared to be enjoying what he was doing. From David's confession, the true motive began to unravel. It turned out that they were not just robbing for ordinary money. Their goal was to acquire funds to buy illegal substances. This robbery was merely part of a darker scheme, but the brutality that unfolded that night exceeded their initial plans. In 2021, 3 years after that devastating night, their trial took place. Yastin, who had remained silent up to that point, finally confessed everything in front of the judge. He recounted how, after the murder, the two of them coldly went to a coffee shop to drink, as if nothing had happened. Even at the cafe, Yastin asked David why he had undressed Roderi's body. David's response was chilling and revolting. He admitted to being attracted to the victim's lifeless body and wanted to violate her. The the horror of that night continued to resonate in the courtroom. Their confessions, filled with brutality and their cold-heartedness in the face of their own actions, made the trial not just about seeking justice, but also about delving into the dark depths of the human soul. These two men took Roderi's life not only through violence but also with savagery that is difficult for the human mind to accept. David admitted in court to violating Roderi's body, but he firmly denied his involvement in the murder. The defense attorneys for both defendants, Yastin and David, tried to defend their clients by arguing that they were under the influence of drugs at the time of the incident. They claimed that the brutal actions could not be considered premeditated murder. In an attempt to defend themselves, Yastin and David pleaded not guilty before the judge. But the prosecutor asserted that their defense was unacceptable. The prosecution urged the jury and the judge to see the clear facts. Both defendants consciously attacked, murdered, and raped the defenseless victim in her own home. The existing evidence reinforced the charge that this crime was a deliberate and heinous act of first-degree murder. After a trial filled with tension, the judge finally delivered the verdict. Yastin and David were found guilty of first-degree murder. Furthermore, David's confession about violating the victim's body further aggravated their sentences. The judge sentenced both of them to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after a minimum of 25 years. What do you think? Is a life sentence proportional to the actions that took someone's life? Is this punishment fair? Story 2. Mongolia, East Asia. On May 6, 1978, a baby girl named Altansia Sharibu was born to Sharibu Sitev and Altan Setseg. Her father was a professor of psychology, while her mother was a housewife. Altansia was raised along with her siblings in St. Petersburg, Russia, where she attended school. She completed her primary education in Russia. In 1990, Altansia, who was 12 years old, returned to Mongolia with her family. At a young age, she had already mastered Mongolian, Russian, Mandarin, English, and French. Sitev described his daughter as cheerful, enthusiastic, confident, and open-minded. Altansia was also known as a girl who loved learning and was careful in taking care of herself. While living in her hometown, Altansia met a male singer named Madai. In 1996, she decided to marry Madai, and shortly after, she gave birth to a child. Altansia became a mother at 18 years old and often entrusted her child to her parents while managing her household. Altansia and her husband frequently faced problems and eventually decided to separate. Altansia then moved to France to attend a modeling school. After completing her studies, she returned to Mongolia. In 2003, Altansia remarried and had another child who was born with a genetic disorder. She faced complex issues and her marriage failed again. Ultimately, Altansia became a single mother raising two children, seeking help from her parents to care for her child. Altansia decided to work as a translator due to her proficiency in several languages. This job required her to travel abroad to countries like China, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Malaysia. Previously, Altansia had also visited Malaysia in 1996 and other countries between 2000 and 2005. Besides working as a language translator, Altansia also visited Hong Kong for business purposes. But in that country, she was labeled as a model, a term used to refer to high-priced escorts. Additionally, Altansia was known to have close ties with high-ranking officials in Malaysia, such as Mr. NR and Mr. ARB. Mr. NR was the Deputy Prime Minister, while Mr. ARB was a national defense analyst working under the Malaysian Ministry of Defense. Altansia's acquaintance with these officials began when they attended an international diamond exhibition in Singapore. Following this meeting, she started an affair with Mr. ARB, despite him already having a wife and children. As Mr. ARB's lover, Altansia often accompanied him on various diplomatic missions and tasks. She was also taken on trips to Kuala Lumpur, Shanghai, Paris, Hong Kong, and Macau. In 2002, Mr. ARB appointed Altansia as a spokesperson in the negotiations for the purchase of 2 submarines in France. She was directly involved in Mr. ARB's work and played a significant role in the submarine purchase transaction. Unfortunately, their relationship ended in 2005 as Mr. ARB grew tired of Altantia. Despite their breakup, Mr. ARB continued to provide Altantia with financial support as a gesture of care and to help with her finances. He often transferred money at her request to meet her needs. But in early 2006, Mr. ARB began to refuse Altantia's demands and distanced himself from her. Consequently, he stopped transferring money to her account. Altantia, still wanting to maintain the relationship for more benefits, remembered Mr. ARB's promise to give her $500,000. She then traveled to Malaysia with her cousin Namira and close friend Uranaya. The three flew from Mongolia and arrived in Malaysia on October 8, 2006. Before leaving, Altantia had told her father she was going to Malaysia to meet her big boss. After arrival in Malaysia, Altantia hired a taxi driver named Ong Chong Bang to spy on Mr. ARB's movements. She also made several phone calls to her former lover, but he never answered. Frustrated, Altantia sent threatening voice messages to Mr. ARB, stating she would resort to desperate measures and would not hesitate to harm Mr. ARB's daughter. Enraged by the threats, Mr. ARB ordered a police officer named Bala Subramaniam to keep an eye on Altantia. Mr. ARB also instructed Bala to ensure the security of his home due to concerns about threats from Altantia. On October 17, 2006, Altantia passed by Mr. ARB's house with Namira and Uranaya in a taxi driven by Ong Chong Bang. Shortly after, Altantia returned to Mr. ARB's residence alone. There, she shouted obscenities in front of the gate. Within minutes, local police arrived and arrested Altantia on charges of causing a disturbance. Altantia explained that she was there to claim a promise from her former lover, who had pledged to give her a large sum of money. She also stated that Mr. ARB had been in a romantic relationship with her, but had broken his promises and ended the relationship unilaterally. Additionally, Altantia revealed that she had tried to contact Mr. ARB to meet amicably, but he had always refused. The police were shocked to hear this. Knowing that Mr. ARB already had a family, they tried to calm Altantia down and advised her to be patient. Although she slightly calmed down, she insisted that the police convey her message to Mr. ARB. Altantia demanded that Mr. ARB give her the promised $500,000 along with 3 plane tickets back to Mongolia. At the police station, Bala Subramaniam overheard the conversation between Altantia and the officers. He informed his boss that Altantia had become desperate and was sharing their personal issues. Mr. ARB then instructed Bala to communicate with Altantia and remind her of his unforgotten promise. Bala Subramaniam gently told Altantia that his boss would fulfill his promise soon and advised her not to cause any more disturbances. For 2 days, Altantia stayed at her accommodation, waiting for news from her former lover, but Mr. ARB neither came nor responded to her messages. This caused Altantia to lose patience, and she planned to confront Mr. ARB. Finally, at 7 p.m., Altantia passed by Mr. ARB's house again with her cousin and friend. At this moment, Bala Subramaniam, who was already aware of the situation, began reporting to Mr. ARB. He informed his boss that Altantia seemed likely to cause another disturbance. Sure enough, a few hours later, Altantia arrived alone at Mr. ARB's house, shouting uncontrollably. Coincidentally, Mr. ARB and his family were not at home as they were attending a fast-breaking event with colleagues. Bala Subramaniam contacted Mr. ARB to report Altantia's actions. In a text message, Mr. ARB instructed his subordinate to talk to Altantia. Bala Subramaniam managed to calm Altantia down for a while as they conversed. Shortly after, in the midst of their conversation, 2 elite police officers, who were associates of Mr. ARB, appeared. These officers were Inspector Azila Hadri, 30 years old, and Corporal Cyril Aza Umar, 35 years old. They approached Altantia and invited her to get into their car. Believing she would be taken to meet Mr. ARB, Altantia complied without protest. Inspector Azila and Corporal Cyril drove Altantia to a remote forest in the hills of Shah Alam, Selangor. After arrival, instead of receiving the money she sought, she was forcibly dragged into the dark forest. The 2 officers then executed Altantia by shooting her twice in the head. Their brutality did not end there. they attached C4 explosives to her body. C4, typically used for demolishing buildings, was employed here to obliterate Altantia's remains. Moments later, an explosion occurred, scattering her flesh across the forest. Altantia's body was blown to pieces, dispersed in various locations within the forest. After the gruesome act, Inspector Azilla and Corporal Cyril left the scene. 2 days later, on October 20th, 2006, Namira and Urania reported Altantia's disappearance to the police. They made the report based on a message left by Altantia, instructing them to contact the police and search for her at Mr. ARB's house if she did not return. After filing the report, Namira and Urania went to Mr. ARB's residence, shouting and demanding Altantia's release. Of course, their efforts were in vain, as Altantia was not hidden there. Meanwhile, the police processed the report and began investigating Altantia's disappearance. Authorities started by examining CCTV footage from the hotel where she was staying. The footage showed Altantia leaving her room at night. Officers then sought out witnesses and gathered statements from them. One of the witnesses was Mr. ARB's neighbor, who saw 2 police officers taking Altantia away. With this information, authorities quickly identified the officers as Inspector Azilla Hadri and Corporal Cyril Aza Umar. The investigators immediately visited the homes of the 2 policemen. At Corporal Cyril's residence, they discovered some of the victim's belongings and his shoes with red stains. Based on this evidence, the 2 suspects were interrogated by Malaysian intelligence and asked to show the location of the incident. Inspector Azilla and Corporal Cyril admitted that Altantia's murder occurred between 12 a.m. on October 19th and 1 a.m. on October 20th in Selangor. Following this confession on November 7th, they agreed to lead investigators to the crime scene. There, the officers found the victim's remains, exactly 17 days after the tragic event. The police then sought statements from witnesses in the area. Some witnesses reported hearing a loud explosion on the night of the incident. Given that Altantia was killed using C4 explosives, the witnesses believed it would be challenging to identify the victim. But police forensic experts managed to extract DNA samples from the remains. Authorities then asked the victim's family to come to Malaysia for further identification. Unexpectedly, their efforts were successful, and the victim was confirmed to be Altantia. Following this, the Malaysian police released news about the brutal disappearance of the beautiful Mongolian model. The story quickly spread across various media outlets, sparking rumors that Altantia was pregnant with a child from her illicit relationship with Mr. ARB. It was speculated that this was the motive behind her brutal murder, to eliminate the unborn child. But this rumor was widely debated and remained unconfirmed. The police continued their investigation and arrested Mr. ARB and other unnamed associates. Suspicion of Mr. ARB's involvement was based on the fact that he was the superior of the 2 suspects, Inspector Azilla Hadri and Corporal Cyril Aza Umar. Mr. ARB willingly cooperated with the police for questioning but denied all accusations, refusing to acknowledge any connection to Altantia's case. The police also suspected Mr. NR, who had close ties with Mr. ARB and was believed to have known the victim. Mr. NR gave a statement to the police and held a press conference to defend himself. Due to a lack of evidence, no charges could be brought against Mr. NR. Meanwhile, the other suspects, including Mr. ARB, remained in prison awaiting the investigation's outcome. The investigation continued, but Mr. ARB was released in 2008 due to insufficient evidence against him. After being freed, he stated that Mr. NR was not involved in the case as he had never known Altantia. Afterward, Mr. ARB departed for London to manage his family's Islamic Peace Foundation. Meanwhile, Inspector Azilla Hadri and Corporal Cyril Aza Umar were found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging in a 2009 court ruling. But the sentence was initially overturned, and both perpetrators were released from prison. Nonetheless, a retrial was held, and the death penalty was reimposed in 2013. Unfortunately, while awaiting the court's decision, Corporal Cyril managed to escape to Australia with the help of a friend. On January 20, 2013, Corporal Cyril was apprehended and imprisoned at a detention center in Sydney. The Malaysian government requested Cyril's extradition, but Australian authorities refused due to their strong opposition to the death penalty. On another front, Bala Subramaniam, who served as a witness in the case, leaked information, claiming that Mr. NR had introduced Altantia to Mr. ARB. But he soon retracted his statement after receiving threats from several individuals. In an interview, Bala Subramaniam mentioned that a group of military intelligence agents was stationed outside his house, monitoring his family. At that time, he was instructed to follow orders from his superiors to ensure his safety. His wife also revealed seeing a mysterious car outside their home and that her husband advised her to lock the gates. She further recounted that Bala Subramaniam was taken away by several men at 2 a.m. During this moment, her husband appeared very frightened, and she wanted to find out what was happening. One of the men who took her husband stated that Bala Subramaniam had made a false statement that put his life at risk. He also advised her to leave Malaysia, offering money for her to survive. When she asked who had ordered this, they replied that the orders came from Mr. NR, one of the highest-ranking officials at the time. Following this incident, Bala Subramaniam and his family's whereabouts became unknown. In 2013, it was reported that Bala Subramaniam had died of a heart attack. 6 months after the Altantia trial, Mr. NR, who was running for Prime Minister, won the political contest and was soon inaugurated as the head of government in Malaysia. Meanwhile, the Altantia case saw no further developments, seemingly halted by the police. But the victim's family and Altantia's legal team continued to push for a reinvestigation. Several years later, Malaysia experienced a regime change, with Mr. NR being replaced by another leader. The predecessor, Mahathir Mohamad, also strongly supported a reinvestigation and pledged to protect anyone willing to reveal the truth, including Corporal Cyril, who was detained in Australia. In 2018, Corporal Cyril, who was detained in Australia, expressed his desire to be spared from the death penalty. He stated that if his request was granted, he would be willing to assist in reopening the investigation by the Malaysian authorities. Corporal Cyril claimed that Mr. NR knew Altantia and played a significant role in the case. He insisted that he was being used as a scapegoat to protect the powerful. He said, "I have no reason to harm anyone, let alone kill someone in such a cruel manner. I appeal to the High Court, which has the authority to decide whether I deserve to live or be sentenced to death. Please do not impose a harsh sentence on me just to satisfy others' demands." But he then retracted this statement for unclear reasons. It was revealed that Corporal Cyril had been visited by an intermediary from Malaysia and offered a secret deal. He then made a video statement asserting that Mr. NR had nothing to do with the Altantia case. Meanwhile, Inspector Azala, who was awaiting execution in Malaysia, also spoke out and made a confession. He stated that he and his colleague received orders to eliminate Altantia from Mr. NR. Inspector Azala revealed that the reason for the order was Mr. NR's belief that Altantia was a foreign spy posing a threat to national security. Azala further claimed that his superior advised them not to trust anything the victim said, as she was skilled at deception. Investigators found the confessions of the two suspects credible, considering they would not have acted without specific orders. Additionally, the explosives used by the perpetrators could not be easily obtained and required authorization from someone with authority. Azala and Cyril were also known to have no prior connection to Altantia and no motive for committing the murder. Nonetheless, Mr. NR denied all allegations. He swore that he was innocent, calling the accusations slanderous. "It's slander. I never met her. I swore in the mosque," said the former Prime Minister. He suggested that the accusations against Inspector Azala might have been orchestrated by political opponents seeking to bring him down. Mr. NR's lawyer also refuted the claims, stating that his client had met with Inspector Azala to gather information. The lawyer argued that Azala was experiencing frustration and had been coerced by someone into making a false confession. They were also suspected of receiving a commission of $300 million after successfully purchasing the submarine. This suspicion emerged thanks to the efforts of the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Agency, which helped investigate Mr. NR and Mr. ARB. This raised suspicions in the Altantia case, suggesting that the two officials had a motive for her murder. One member of the Anti-Corruption Agency revealed that Altantia might have been involved in corruption collusion, and nepotism committed by high-ranking officials. Therefore, she had to be eliminated to prevent her from revealing information that could tarnish their reputations. In 2018, Mr. NR was also accused of abuse of power and involvement in the One Malaysia Development Berhad, 1MDB, scandal, which involved siphoning state funds into Mr. NR's personal accounts. On July 3, 2018, Mr. NR was arrested at his home by anti-corruption officers, and on July 28, 2018, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison after being found guilty of corruption, money laundering, and abuse of power. Following these revelations, Mr. NR and Mr. ARB were suspected of wanting to cover up their illegal activities, which were known by Altantia. Additionally, Altantia was believed to be pregnant with Mr. ARB's child, so her body was destroyed to prevent any DNA evidence from being found in the fetus. Meanwhile, Altantia's lawyer considered these suspicions as signals that could uncover the truth. He hoped that the Malaysian authorities under the new regime would reopen Altantia's case and that the police would be willing to conduct a new investigation. The victim's family, including Altantia's father, experienced deep trauma when visiting Malaysia to seek justice for their late daughter. He also had tremendous fear of revealing anything that could incriminate the suspects. He firmly believed that Altantia was deliberately killed in a cruel manner, despite having no wrongdoing against Malaysia. To this day, Altantia's case remains unresolved, and the Malaysian police's decision is still unknown. As for Mr. ARB, it is reported that he went to Malaysia and then to London to manage his family's foundation. Story 3. Friday, March 9, 2012. That day, a local man living in Mykolaiv City, Ukraine, decided to walk to work because his car wouldn't start. As he walked past an abandoned clinic, he heard a woman voice groaning in pain from inside. He immediately entered the building and looked for the source. It turned out, he found a girl without any clothes on, trapped in a burning trash pit in the basement of the building. He immediately called 911 for help. Within 2 minutes, police officers and an ambulance arrived there to try to evacuate the girl from the hole. She was very concerned. She tried to stand up but fell again because of the pain from the burns on her legs and back. Officers were forced to pull her out of the hole and take her to hospital. The poor girl was identified as Oksana, 18 years old. Even though she had burns on 55% of her body, she survived and was able to talk, and named 3 men who had tried to kill her. While at the hospital, the doctors immediately took action to keep Oksana alive. The doctor reported that her organs were almost boiling and almost cooked because she was roasted in burning embers for 8 hours. This caused her 2 kidneys can't work, due to prolonged burning in her back area. Oksana's mother, Tishiana, who works in Kiev City, was contacted immediately to visit her daughter who was in critical condition in hospital. Actually, who is Oksana? What happened to her? How could she survive in a hole with burning embers for 8 hours? Let's discuss it. So, this girl named Oksana Serhievna Makar was born on June 11, 1993, in a village not far from Mykolaiv City. In fact, Oksana's life is not easy. She was cared for by her biological mother who was desperately trying to earn a living. She also rarely sees her biological father, because her mother deliberately separated her since Oksana was born. Her father was involved in cases of alcohol abuse, 3 cases of theft, and also drug trafficking. After her father and mother separated, her mother went to prison because of a robbery case she committed. In fact, this was her 3rd crime. That's why Oksana was cared for by her grandparents since childhood. When she entered school, Oksana was already showing signs of unusual delinquency. She likes to open her school friends' bags to steal stationery, and once stole her class teacher's wallet. This is thought to be due to childhood trauma, when she experienced sexual harassment several times from her mother's uncle and friends. That's why Oksana was sent to a boarding school in Kiev City when she was still in elementary school. According to her teachers, Oksana also had learning difficulties and always got bad grades. She also tried to escape from the dorm several times. Even though Oksana is very problematic, on the other hand, she also has a soft heart and a high social spirit. She often shared candy and apples with her friends and people she met. When she was 12 years old, her mother remarried a man, and took Oksana from the boarding school to be cared for again. Unfortunately, Oksana could only go to junior high school and did not continue her education any further. The bartender who was working that night said that it all happened on Thursday night. Oksana came to the cafe to celebrate International Women's Day with a can of beer and a glass of juice and enjoyed live music like ordinary people do. The bartender already knew Oksana because Oksana had been there several times, so they had a chance to chat for a while. However, 3 young men also came to the cafe and took a table near Oksana's table. They are Yevhen, 23 years, Maxim, 24 years, and Artem, 22 years. When questioned by the police, Oksana, who could still speak, said at that time that she had indeed joined the 3 young men's table because she had known them before, so she had no hesitation in joining them. After that, Oksana was offered alcoholic drinks by them until she was very drunk. But the bartender who worked there believed that they had put something in Oksana's drink. While Oksana was drinking with the 3 young men, Oksana drank less than they did, and strangely enough, Oksana became more drunk until she could barely wake up. The bartender also heard that they were taking Oksana to Maxim's apartment to rest. But the whole situation became even more terrifying when Oksana was found in the basement of an abandoned clinic. The police handling this case immediately arrested the 3 young men for questioning and were detained temporarily. But strangely, before this case was investigated in more depth, the police released Maxim and Artem on bail and with travel restrictions for no apparent reason. While in hospital, Oksana had to fight for her life. The treating doctors said that Oksana's chance of survival was only 2% and had decreased to 1%. However, the doctors were amazed because Oksana was able to survive 8 hours in a hole with burning fire. Usually, people will die within 2 to 3 hours with the same condition. They also said that they had never handled such a horrific case in the last 30 years. Tatiana, her mother, said, "She is my only one. I would give everything for her, including my skin and kidneys, so that she could survive." Oksana's case has received a lot of attention from Ukrainian society. Billionaires and the richest people in Ukraine also donated their money for Oksana's treatment. From the governor, prime minister, and deputies to the president of Ukraine who was serving at that time, they also ordered that Oksana be given the best medical care. At the request of Rinat Akhmetov, one of the richest people in Ukraine who also paid for the treatment. Oksana was then transferred to the Donetsk Burn Center, a modern medical institution with an international reputation handled by Swiss surgeons. However, on March 12, 2012, doctors were forced to amputate her arms and legs to stop the spread of gangrene, or a condition where parts of the body turn black due to dead tissue due to lack of blood supply. One of the TV station owners in Ukraine also asked Oksana to be transferred to a treatment center in Moscow, Russia. But the doctor refused because they considered that Oksana's condition did not allow her to travel long distances to Russia. More than 150 people in Ukraine donated their blood, especially for Oksana. But Oksana's condition is increasingly critical due to the complications she is suffering. But doctors are still trying to carry out a series of operations such as skin grafts and other surgeries. The release of the 2 suspects on bail drew criticism from local and international television media. Television media accused Maxim and Artem of being released because they were children of government officials and had ties to a number of politicians. Maxim is the adopted son of the former chairman of the district council, while Artem is the son of the former chief prosecutor. This information sparked anger among Ukrainians who held massive demonstrations in the streets for days. Demonstrations not only occurred in Mykolaiv city, but also spread to other cities. This reached the ears of the president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, so he went straight to the field to carry out an examination of the police who allegedly released them. The president also ordered the immediate arrest of Maxim and Artem, then fired 4 police officers who released the 2 suspects. Finally, Maxim and Artem were arrested again after large demonstrations in various cities, and on direct orders from the president. After their arrest, the true chronology was revealed. In further interrogation by the police on Yevhen, Maxim, and Artem, they admitted that they had planned to kidnap Oksana. Maxim is a young politician and successful businessman descended from his adoptive parents who once served as chairman of the district council before retiring in 2009. Maxim at that time worked as a lawyer in the culture department of the Mykolaiv City Council. He also served as director of a utility company, being a major supplier of water heaters to schools, hospitals, and government buildings. Maxim, who feels he has money and power, thinks that he can have a relationship with any woman he wants, but not with Oksana. In the last year before the attack, Maxim tried to get Oksana's attention and have a relationship with her, but Oksana always refused, causing Maxim to feel hurt. Even though Oksana comes from a poor family, she still refuses money from Maxim, who invites her to spend the night together in his apartment. Finally, he invited two of his friends, Yevhen and Artem, to attack Oksana in the private apartment given to her by her adoptive parents, which was the place they had chosen. At that time, Maxim already knew that Oksana had gone to the cafe, so they went there and invited Oksana to join them. When Oksana was drunk, they took Oksana to his apartment and took advantage of Oksana's helplessness to rape her in turn. But when it was Yevhen's turn, Oksana woke up and started fighting and screaming. In fact, the neighbors of the apartment also heard Oksana's screams, but they didn't call the police because they thought the young people were partying. Yevhen then strangled Oksana many times and thought that Oksana had died. Maxim and Artem, who knew about this, also panicked and thought of ways to eliminate traces of their crimes. The two of them went out for a while to look for a suitable dump. When they found the abandoned clinic, they returned to the apartment, but Yevhen apparently wasn't finished with his vile activities. After that, they wrapped the naked Oksana in a blanket and took her to the car, then threw her into the rubbish pit in the basement of the clinic, and lit a fire so they could eliminate any traces of them leaving. Oksana woke up and was forced to survive in the hot hole, until she was found 8 hours later in the morning, by a local resident who was walking to work. After the best expert doctors from all over the country worked as hard as possible, Oksana turned out to be increasingly critical because of the many complications that arose due to her condition. On the evening of March 29, 2012, Oksana experienced bleeding in her lungs due to breathing problems due to inhaling too much smoke for 8 hours, which was worsened by body fatigue, edema or swelling in the brain, and sepsis, which caused to have a heart attack. Resuscitation efforts lasted more than 40 minutes, but these efforts were unsuccessful. So on March 30th, 2012 at 3 a.m., the doctor declared Oksana dead. Her funeral was held the next day, on March 31st, 2012, in the city where she was born. Because Oksana died before she was married, she wore a white wedding dress in accordance with local tradition. Meanwhile, conferences on cases of planning and premeditated murder were held for several months. When they confessed, Maxim and Artem continued to blame Yevhen, because Yevhen had killed Oksana. Finally, on November 27, 2012, the Mykolaiv City Court found them guilty on all charges and sentenced Yevhen to life imprisonment, Maxim to 15 years in prison, and Artem to 14 years in prison. However, this decision again sparked protests from the public, because the punishment for perpetrators of crimes and premeditated murder was considered too light. Even Yevhen's lawyer did not agree with the life prison sentence imposed on his client, so they appealed. But at the next appeal hearing, the judge refused and continued to uphold the decision of the previous trial, while Maxim and Artem continued to accept the verdict handed down to them. Story 4. Brianna Zunino Dennison was born on March 29, 1988, in Reno, Nevada. She is the daughter of a mother named Bridget Zunino and her father, Jeff Dennison. She has a younger brother named Brighton. Brianna grew up in a very loving family. That's why she is known as a cheerful girl who gets along easily with everyone she meets. After Brianna graduated high school, she decided to move to Santa Barbara, California, and attend college to start her new life there. She attended Santa Barbara City College, where she majored in child psychology. Brianna really likes traveling and getting to know various cultures in the world. That's why she has visited several countries such as Hawaii, Mexico, Jamaica, Japan, Italy, Egypt, Hungary, Austria, and France. Her ability to relate to people in all walks of life makes her relatable to anyone. In January 2008, Brianna returned to Reno to spend time with her family, because at that time the campus was on holiday. However, her return home was the last time the family would meet Brianna. Saturday, January 19th, 2008. The sun looked bright that day. Brianna, who had previously planned to attend a party with her friends, then asked her mother for permission and told her that after the party was over, she would sleep at the house of a friend named Katie Hunter, who was usually called Kate, who was already familiar with Brianna's family. Brianna's family and Kate's family have known each other since they were in high school, and Brianna would always meet Kate's family when Brianna was on holiday visiting Reno City. Exactly at 7 p.m., Brianna and her friends went to Sands Regency, which is very close to where Kate lives, to attend a party. After the party was over, they left for Kate's house, which is close to the University of Nevada, to rest and continue their activities the next day. Once at Kate's house, they cleaned up and changed into their pajamas. Because Kate's room was not large enough for them to sleep together, Brianna decided to sleep on the sofa in the living room of Kate's house, which was quite soft and comfortable. Around at 4 a.m., they started to feel sleepy and wanted to sleep. Kate then gave her a blanket, pillow, and teddy bear to accompany Brianna, who was sleeping alone in the living room. However, the front door of Kate's house appeared to have been left unlocked on purpose, without any clear reason from Brianna, which was the beginning of Brianna's disappearance. Who knows where she went, or maybe this is a kidnapping case. Sunday, January 20th, 2008. As the sun began to rise in the morning, Kate woke up from her sleep and found that Brianna was not on the sofa where she had slept the night before. Then, Kate and her friends looked all over the house, but couldn't find Brianna. After taking a closer look at Brianna's sofa bed, there were drops of bloodstains, and they noticed that Brianna's belongings were still intact, such as her shoes, cell phone, and wallet containing money and identity cards. Kate and her friends were very worried because that morning the weather was very cold, and it didn't make sense for Brianna to go without her coat and things, especially because Brianna was known as a responsible girl, and her friends were sure that Brianna will let them know if she needs to go out for any reason. Kate then called Brianna's mother and told her to immediately call the local police. A major police investigation begins into the mysterious disappearance of that girl. On the same day, the police began identifying and searching by putting up posters containing Brianna's photo, then began distributing them throughout the Reno City. It was stated that the girl was probably only barefoot and was wearing a white shirt and track pants. Kate explained to the police that she had not heard any noise and that her dog had not barked that day. In the following days, the Reno City Police Department conducted a forensic investigation into Kate's home and found DNA on the doorknob belonging to a man who could not be identified because the DNA was not registered in the police database. After forensic analysis, a blood stain was found on the pillow, and it was confirmed that the blood was Brianna's, and it was possible that Brianna had injuries near her mouth and nose because her face was probably pressed hard with the pillow. Then, the police believed that this incident was a case of kidnapping accompanied by abuse. The police finally checked Brianna's cell phone and obtained data that Brianna had communicated with her ex-boyfriend who lives in the state of Oregon. After investigating the connection between the girl's ex-boyfriend, the police stated that her ex-boyfriend had no connection to Brianna's disappearance because he was in Oregon when the incident occurred. Efforts by the police and FBI, assisted by approximately 1,700 volunteers from various regions, to help with the search, have not been able to find any light due to the extreme winter weather that hit the city. The police, who again analyzed the DNA of the man who was found, discovered that the man's DNA was linked to previous cases of attacks on two women in different places. Therefore, the police believed that the motive for attacking Brianna was based on a sexual crime motive, so the police asked for information from almost 100 sexual crime perpetrators registered on the police database within 2 kilometers of the scene. It was reported that the first case of assault involved a 21-year-old girl who was attacked by a man while walking home on November 13, 2007. When the perpetrator started attacking the victim from behind, the victim tried to defend herself using the scissors she was carrying. The perpetrator had a scratch on his hand which left a trail of blood on the victim's scissors. The victim survived and immediately reported it to the police. The perpetrator carried out his actions again at night on December 16, 2007, when a 22-year-old girl was walking home. The perpetrator managed to make her faint. Then, when she realized, she was already in the perpetrator's truck, and the perpetrator was on top of her. She don't know what made the perpetrator let her go. so the victim rushed away and reported the attack to the police. The victim recognized the face of the perpetrator of the attack, and the police made a sketch of the suspect's face as the victim told the same detective who handled Brianna's case. Police are still looking for other evidence, including the suspect's truck which was used to carry out the crime. The previous victim still remembered the suspect's truck, then gave testimony as to what kind of truck the suspect used. As a result, the police were able to release a sketch of the suspect's face and some more information about the characteristics of the kidnapper, and asked people to contact the police if they knew anyone who looked like the suspect's facial sketch who was approximately 20 to 30 years old. Then, another woman contacted police and claimed to have been assaulted in October 2007 in the University of Nevada parking lot. With the information provided by the woman, the police created a composite sketch of the series of attacks that occurred. These attacks all had the same pattern occurring at night in the same area where Brianna disappeared. Police believe that because the other victims are still alive, Brianna is likely alive as well. Friday, February 15, 2008, a man named Albert Jimenez was returning to work from his lunch break at a Subway restaurant when he was walking in a field near the Reno Business Park. At that time, he saw an orange cloth sticking out of the gutter. As he got closer, he discovered that the cloth was actually a pair of orange socks still attached to the legs of what he initially thought was a mannequin, but turned out to be a woman's decomposed body. Because he didn't bring a cell phone, he returned to his workplace in a hurry. Then he immediately called the police. Not long after that, the police immediately arrived at the scene. After forensic analysis, it was confirmed that the body found was Brianna, 19 years old. It was also reported that the victim experienced pressure on the neck and died almost a month ago. The location where Brianna's body was found, approximately 13 kilometers from Kate's house. A pair of panties was found near Brianna's body, and the DNA of an unknown woman was also found on the panties. The police said that the underwear did not belong to Brianna and was deliberately left behind by the perpetrator. They believe that the perpetrator has a fetish for underwear, so the police ask people who know the underwear as theirs to report it, because they can help find the identity of the perpetrator. On November 1, 2008, police received information from an anonymous woman who said that a 27-year-old man named James Michael Bila had been behaving very strangely since Brianna's death. The police went to James' house to ask for information and kindly asked James to provide a DNA sample, but he denied his involvement in the case, and he also did not provide his DNA sample. Police detectives noted that James was very nervous at the meeting, and he did not make eye contact with the police officers at all. Apart from that, James is also known to work near the University of Nevada, which is quite close to Kate's house. Police believe that James was the main perpetrator of a series of crimes that occurred, but without physical evidence that could incriminate him, the police had no choice but to let him go. Who really is James Michael Bila? James Michael Bila was born on June 29, 1981, in Chicago City, Illinois. James' family moved to Reno City when James was 9 years old. James is known as a handsome and funny, but when he was a teenager, James, who had been following martial arts since he was a child, was seen to have quite high emotions, to the point that some people knew him as a naughty man who often disturbed and bullied his friends in middle school. After graduating from high school, James joined and worked in the American Army, but his career did not go smoothly due to his delinquency. In 2001, he was fired for using drugs, and in 2002, James was arrested again by the police after threatening his neighbor, who was his ex-girlfriend, with a knife. At that time, his ex-girlfriend demanded that the police arrest and sentence James for his actions. And in April 2003, James was sentenced to alcohol counseling and then sentenced to have no contact with his ex-girlfriend for a year. But at that time, no DNA samples were taken, because his action was only a minor offense. After previous run-ins with the law around 2004, James met his new girlfriend and moved in with her. She is Carlene Harmon, who lives in the East, Reno City, and from that relationship, James was blessed with a child. Neighbors who lived near James' house described James as a normal, good man who took martial arts classes. In fact, a police officer who trained with him in martial arts class did not harbor any suspicions about James. Sunday, November 12, 2008. At that time, The police immediately acted quickly to meet Carlene Harmon for questioning. During the conversation, police asked several questions about her child, including where James was at the time of Brianna's abduction. Carlene began to explain to the police that her relationship with James was quite problematic, and from Carlene's confession, James often slept outside the house for days, using a truck as a second home. Carlene also said that it was her friend who made a report to the police about her husband. Carlene told her friend that she had found women's underwear in James' truck while they were driving home from Washington State, and she was suspicious after seeing James behaving very strangely since Brianna's death. Carlene then agreed to provide a DNA sample from their 4-year-old son at the time, so that police could compare it with DNA collected at the scene. The results of the analysis showed that the child's DNA was similar to the DNA found in Kate's door algae. This means that the person responsible for the series of crimes so far is the person who has a DNA match with that boy. On November 25, 2008, Reno City Police finally obtained an arrest warrant for James Michael Bila. He was arrested while picking up his son at daycare. James was taken to prison and charged with the various crimes he had committed. From the results of the analysis, it was discovered that James' DNA matched the DNA found at the crime scene, and made him the main suspect in a series of crimes that happened to Brianna and 3 previous cases. At his final trial on June 2, 2010, after 9 hours of trial, James was found guilty by the judge for all his crimes, and James was finally sentenced to death. It didn't stop there. James, with his lawyer, appealed to the Nevada Supreme Court several times, arguing that James had a traumatic childhood because his father was an alcoholic and had a temperamental temper. In his defense, the lawyer also said that the defendant was a productive member of society. In this case, his lawyers are trying to avoid the death penalty. However, the appeal was rejected, so James had to languish in prison and await execution for what he had done. This case was used as a lesson by the Nevada Regional Police to record the DNA of each person and enter it into the police database, so that if someone commits a more serious crime and leaves their DNA at the scene, they can be identified and arrested more quickly. To honor Brianna's passing, residents of Reno City left flowers at the place where Brianna's body was found and expressed their condolences for the case that befell her. Story 5. San Luis Potosí, a large city with a population of more than 600,000 inhabitants located in the country of Mexico. To look back at the history of happy families originating from this city. Yulia Masne Safanchik was born in Russia and raised in Ukraine. At a very young age, she migrated to Mexico and decided to settle in the city of San Luis Potosí. That's when she met Igor Lekhtchenko, a man also of Russian origin who migrated to Mexico since 1991 to work in a circus show. Igor and Yulia's relationship grew closer, and in 1995, Yulia became pregnant, so they both decided to get married while waiting for the birth of their first child. In 1996, a daughter was born and they named Anastasia Lekhtchenko Masne. The family lived in happiness, and Anastasia was described as a sweet, caring, jovial, and normal little child like most toddlers her age. Even the family also had time to appear in a reality show on one of the television stations at the end of '90. To support his family, Igor worked as a professional swimming coach, while Yulia helps take care of their small family. In 2001, Igor took his small family to move to the city of Tijuana, Baja State, California. This larger and more densely populated city is located in the northern part of the country of Mexico and is directly adjacent to the city of San Diego in California, United States. Igor took his wife and child there because in that city, there were more jobs related to his profession. Although the city is notorious for its many Mexican drug cartels, which could put his family at risk. In 2003, their second daughter was born and named Valeria Lekhtchenko Masne. Unfortunately, Valeria suffers from several complications of congenital physical defects and Asperger's syndrome, a mental and neurological development disorder classified as an autism spectrum disorder. So Valeria needs special attention from both parents. A few years later, Igor and Yulia finally divorced. So Igor left their home and moved to another place. But Igor is still responsible for supporting his 2 children by sending Yulia a little monthly money. But the increased needs make their lives feel so hard. Moreover, Yulia also cannot work because Valeria, who has special needs, cannot be left at home alone for a long time. As time goes by, Anastasia, who previously grew into a sweet and cheerful little girl, begins to have problems. At only 14 years old, Anastasia was addicted to alcohol and drugs. Even Anastasia also became a commercial sex worker in order to earn money to buy drinks and drugs. Not to mention Anastasia's behavior made Yulia inflamed, so that great quarrels constantly broke out between the mother and daughter. Because of their frequent quarrels, relatives and neighbors are used to it. The main reason is because Anastasia cannot escape her addiction. One day, Anastasia ran away from home after a fight with her mother. Yulia, panicked, began posting a status on her Facebook asking her friends to help find Anastasia. But within a few days, Anastasia was back home like nothing had ever happened. A few weeks later, Anastasia ran away from home again, and she did it again for the third time. This makes Yulia feel frustrated, so she puts a photo of Anastasia on a billboard to announce to the townspeople that Anastasia disappeared from her house. The townspeople, who saw the announcement on the reclama, became sensitized and suspected that Anastasia might be the victim of a drug cartel kidnapping, a crime that occurs most often in Mexico. But again and again Anastasia returned home in good health and safe. A few weeks ago, Igor realized that Anastasia needed help because of her addiction. So Igor, who was helped by his friends, then put Anastasia in a rehabilitation center. But after undergoing several therapies, the doctor stated that Anastasia could not be treated there because she was difficult to control, which caused her to often fight with other patients. Igor then took Anastasia to consult a psychiatrist. But again, the psychiatrist also said that Anastasia did not have the slightest intention to change, and if left unchecked, Anastasia would get worse in the future. Although Anastasia did not show much progress, the psychiatrist still let her go and let Anastasia live her own life. As time passed, it turned out that Anastasia's behavior became worse than before. She is more aggressive to everyone. It wasn't just her parents, but also the relatives and friends she met that caused her to constantly fight with everyone. When Anastasia returned home, she also never spent a day without fighting with her mother, because Yulia was very disgusted with Anastasia's behavior, until finally Yulia and also Valeria, who was innocent, were found horribly dead in their home. A few days have passed. Neighbors first heard no more noise from the Lechchenko family home, but they complained of a pungent smell emanating from the family's home. Eventually, some neighbors reported their concerns to the police to ask the police to inspect the house. The police who came there also smelled the same smell. When the police knocked on the door of the house, no one opened the door. Finally, the police decided to break down the door of the house and search the contents of the house. But they finally discovered a terrible thing after knowing where the source of the smell came from. Police found some noisy plastic garbage pieces of decomposing human body parts inside a bathroom. Police immediately took the package to the hospital for an autopsy and identification. The identification results showed that the two bodies were Yulia Lechchenko-Masne, 45-year-old, and her youngest daughter Valeria Lechchenko-Masne, 12 years old. Some of their organs were also missing and could not be found anywhere. Police initially suspected that they were victims of a drug cartel murder. It is possible that the family was in trouble and got into a dispute with a drug dealer, so their corpses were mutilated in such a way, because it seems to be common there. But after an in-depth investigation, police did not find any clues about the family's involvement with a network of drug dealers. In fact, the police received information from neighbors who said that Anastasia, the eldest daughter of the family, had problems with illegal drugs. Her label behavior also caused her to often quarrel with her mother. Eventually, the police made Anastasia the most wanted person during the investigation. On July 13, 2015, 3 days after the discovery of the two bodies, police arrested Anastasia on a beach in Sinaloa State, where drug cartels usually gather more than 1,500 kilometers from downtown Tijuana. At the time of the arrest, Anastasia showed no resistance. In fact, she cooperates with the police to confess to all her crimes if she is the perpetrator of the murder of his mother and younger sister. She suspected that her mother and sister had worked together to practice magic 4 times, which would harm her. Then how did Anastasia confess? We go back to Sunday, June 7, 2015, when it all happened. That day Anastasia, as usual, only returned home after she had been partying on drugs with her friends all day. Inside the house, she saw that her mother had fallen asleep in the room because it was already night and her younger sister was still put on the sofa in front of the TV and left to watch TV. As Anastasia lay down, she suddenly heard an occult whisper saying that her mother was a witch. According to some sources, the practice of witchcraft is still practiced in Mexico to solve all kinds of problems in society, such as illness, financial problems, behavior of brat, even for revenge. Anastasia kept hearing those voices and decided to follow the supernatural promptings she heard. She first started opening her computer and doing an internet search on how to kill people fastest, how long the murder took place, how to dismember the corpse. After Anastasia determined the appropriate method, she immediately took the rope and went to her mother's room and saw her mother asleep. She approached her mother slowly so as not to wake her up, and began to put a rope around her mother's neck and tie her, pulling the rope with all her might until her mother screamed. Yulia continued to resist, but her body started to feel weak. It took half an hour to kill her mother until she didn't breathe. After successfully killing her mother, Anastasia again gets a supernatural whisper telling her to kill Valeria, because her younger sister becomes her mother's puppet to practice magic on Anastasia. She then went to tie the rope around her sister's neck. But before that, Anastasia had time to lie next to her younger sister and hugged her sister tightly as a farewell. Finally, Anastasia pulled the rope around her younger sister's neck lifeless. As I explained earlier, Valeria suffers from several complications and physical disabilities that make her unable to do anything. Valeria just fell silent and did not react when the murder occurred. Even just shouting, she can't either. That's why Anastasia admitted that it was easier to kill her younger sister than her mother. After the murder, she went out of the house and took a walk on the beach smoking a cigarette. It was very cold that night. It was a coincidence that she also read on the internet that it was easier to do the activity of cutting meat in cold weather because it could warm her body. In her confession, Anastasia again heard a supernatural voice telling her to pry out her sister's eyes and remove her mother's heart and liver in order to break the spell, because her mother was a witch. Anastasia then went home and took a spoon to pry out her sister's eyes. She also took a knife and pulled out her mother's heart and liver. The organs of the body were thrown into the toilet and then flushed. That night she resumed her action by cutting the bodies of the two and putting them in plastic garbage, then stored in one of the bathrooms. The next day, she continued her life as if nothing had happened and threw a party with her friends the same day in the house without anyone realizing that there was a mutilated corpse inside. Until finally the victim's body was found by the police already decomposed. 3 days later, as the arrest took place, the neighbors began to notice the strangeness on the night of the murder that as the murder occurred, the neighbors heard Yulia's voice screaming. But they did not immediately report to because they considered the quarrel between Yulia and her daughter to have become commonplace. When the investigation was carried out, Anastasia began to be accompanied by a lawyer. But her lawyer instead told Anastasia to change her story and told the judge that she had been threatened by the police to confess to all the acts. As her trial began, the judge ordered Anastasia's release temporarily, as prosecutors could not provide enough evidence to charge Anastasia with murder. It was clear that the judge's order caused unrest and rebellion from the townspeople who thought the court was releasing criminals who had clearly confessed to their actions. But on June 19, 2015, Anastasia was again arrested while walking in the park. Here her lawyer again tried to release Anastasia and spread to the media that the Russian government began to interfere in the case, because Anastasia has Russian blood. However, the statement was not proven and did not affect the court to keep Anastasia in detention center, because Anastasia was already officially a Mexican citizen. Anastasia was evaluated by 3 prominent psychiatrists and all 3 said that Anastasia suffered from mental disorders due to excessive drug use. Igor would not comment on his daughter,